Historically, video games have been seen as mostly a thing for kids, which led to the first few years of the gaming space being centered around titles that were designed specifically with kids in mind. Thankfully, grown-ups have become more and more commonplace as the industry has continued to evolve, though that hasn't stopped a steady stream of kid-friendly games from continuing to hit shelves that even these adults are able to sink their teeth into. Because of this hybridization over who titles are being designed for, even the friendliest looking game can house moments that aren't necessarily what a concerned Mumsnet user would expect. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are 10 horrifying moments in children's video games. Number 10. Dead Hand, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. When it comes to creepy moments in The Legend of Zelda, most people see Majora's Mask as the creme de la creme of the series. This has led to its predecessor flying under the radar, despite packing some punches of its own. The bottom of the well in Kakariko Village is probably the creepiest location in the whole game, with the murky cistern housing baddies like the skeletal Big Skull Chulas and mummified Gibdos. The most nightmare-inducing part of this level is reserved for its boss, Dead Hand. Even for a fantasy game, it's astonishing and, let's face it, a little disturbing just how much attention has been put in to ensuring this guy is absolutely horrifying. A zombified head with an unnaturally large jaw and blood-red blotches across its pale skin, Dead Hands have 4 to 6 disembodied hands that it uses to suddenly snag any unsuspecting players. The way in which it skulks around like a slug is what especially gave this article's author nightmares back in the day. The fact that Ocarina of Time has had this enduring legacy of being the brighter of the two N64 titles mean interactions like Dead Hand earn extra points for being far more surprising. Other Dead Hands can be found in Ganon's Castle and the Shadow Temple, although the combination of this zombie burrowing in the depths of a sewer surrounding make it the most chilling. Number 9. Crying Blood, ZACK and WIKI, Quest for Barbaros' Treasure. The Nintendo Wii is famous for many things, and one of those is not having a slew of especially gritty games. Designed to slot alongside the gimmicks that are motion controls and Mii's, the Wii was a system designed for casual gamers across the whole family. And for the most part, Capcom's ZACK and WIKI Quest for Barbaros' Treasure fits into this criterion nicely. A bright and vibrant game seeing players take control of a young pirate and his monkey best friend as they solve various point-and-click puzzles, lots of kids presumably would have been given this as a harmless gift from their parents. And almost all of those players will have received a massive fright when going to the Bell Tower of Requiem. Needing to make sure the moon is directly shining on it, players will encounter a small fountain with a woman's face on it. Pulling on it will suddenly have the woman's eyes open, start bleeding from them, and then begin to scream. A decent jump scare in a game that looks more like a kid-friendly cartoon. Number 8. Burning Orphanage, Psychonauts. For the most part, Psychonauts is exactly the kind of bright, light-hearted, fun jaunt that lots of kids would have in their gaming collection. The visuals are reminiscent of a Tim Burton flick, and the gameplay premise of psychic protagonist Raz exploring the colourful minds of his peers in an effort to help them move on from their fears wouldn't look out of place in a child's book. Yet there are some dark and sinister secrets lurking around the game that are far from the sorts of things some parents would want their children exposed to. In the level Mila's Dance Party, players are transported to a world full of non-stop disco jiving. Get it out in classic 70s clubber, Mila is the sort of carefree gal everyone wants to hang out with on a Friday night. However, she does make a note of telling the player there are certain rooms that are off limits, saying that to enter them would be to crash the party and not to do so. Exploring these rooms will reveal Mila's harrowing past. Players will be presented with a hellish experience filled with tormented souls, crying out lines like, "Help us, Mila, why did you let us die?" Turns out Mila was the owner of an orphanage, and when it burned down, all the children inside perished in the flames. Appearances can be deceiving, but this was one shocking twist few players could have been equipped for. Number 7. Zero, Kirby's Dream Land 3. To be fair, the Kirby franchise is one that specializes in having its bright and colorful aesthetic cover some pretty profound themes. Nevertheless, it's hard to think of a series that is as cuddly and colorful as the one involving this pink Nintendo mascot. The last game on the SNES that has since been ported over to the Wii and Wii U, Dream Land 3, is one of the most beloved entries to the franchise, and for the most part, it matches the kid-friendly aesthetics of the series perfectly. However, the game also features a secret boss who fully pulls apart those pleasant themes. Zero is a floating eyeball that, the more damage players do to it, will see it start to leak blood across the screen. In fact, after dealing even more damage to Zero, players will be treated to the sight of the boss's pupil splattering out of its socket. It's a boss battle that comes out of absolutely nowhere and is well worth its weight as one of the most jarring sequences in the Kirby franchise. Number 6. Microwaving Hamsters, Maniac Mansion. Despite the violent-sounding title and spooky elements present, Maniac Mansion was a favorite video game for kids looking for something a bit racier than the duck hunts and punch-outs of the late 80s. The game went through several reworks for the Nintendo Entertainment System, with Nintendo being concerned that the themes might not make the game kid-friendly enough. But by and large, the story of a group of 6 teens navigating dangers and solving puzzles across a mad scientist's house generally steered clear of anything too terrifying. However, one now infamous scene that even the low-grade slasher flicks of the day hadn't thought of obviously slipped through these cracks. If playing as either Sid or Razor, the player can pick up the pet hamster belonging to the scientist's son, Weird Ed. With these particular masochists, there's an opportunity to bring the little fur ball down to the kitchen, stuff it in the microwave, and wait as blood and guts sprays the walls. It's a twisted moment that comes out of nowhere, and given the limitations of games around, was undoubtedly one of the most gruesome sights players had seen at the time. Number 5. Level 14, Lemmings. When the original Lemmings hit shelves in 1991, it seemed like Psygnosis had managed to hit the nail on the head when it came to creating some real mindless fun for kids everywhere at the time. Spawned from the urban myth that all these small rodents follow each other off on a death march together, the titular mascots provided the perfect protagonist for a game based on overcoming obstacles and getting to the end goal. Even with the ability to have these little guys blast themselves into oblivion, the game does a solid job in keeping things on the harmlessly slapstick side of things. Except for one instance, Level 14. Level 14 Menacing set players off on a hellish-inspired trek across some of the most bizarre and legitimately unsettling landscapes able to fit on the Amiga. Skulls with worms coming out of the eye sockets, dismembered limbs sticking out of all parts of the screen, and blood dripping down from the ceiling round out what amounts to a fairly jarring moment from a game that we can imagine a lot of parents just picked up for their kids, not thinking much of it. Number 4. River TWYGZ, Super Paper Mario. Horrifying and Super Mario are two phrases that generally we would never put together. Luigi's Mansion had a couple of legit creepy moments, but that was the whole point of the game at the end of the day. But there's one moment in 2007's Super Paper Mario that manages to eclipse anything that game could throw up. The River TWYGZ is a part of the underwear in Paper Mario lore and is said to be made up of the souls of lost sinners, in what is an obvious reference to the river Styx in Greek mythology. During their time on and in the river, players will encounter underhands, invisible skeletal hands that lunge out in an attempt to drag the player down to a watery grave. It's one of the most memorable portions of the game, but what elevates this otherwise creepy cartoony sequence to a more traumatizing level is the soundtrack that accompanies it. Heavy feedback and audio effects are used to distort the sounds made by the inhabitants of the river, with some gamers even claiming there are messages and cries for help nested in. Creepy stuff. Number 3. The Cave of Bad Dreams, Rayman 2. Rayman 2 is the franchise's big jump to 3D and largely follows a fairly light-hearted, child-friendly tone, featuring Rayman teaming up with the fairies, lums, amphibians, and teensies to save the fairy glade from robotic pirates. Most of the game is presented with warm colors and fantastical themes, making it a particularly popular game with a certain generation. However, one notable level in the game gave almost every single one of these gamers nightmares during a playthrough. Also known as the Kingdom of the Dead, players travel to the realm seeking the elixir of life. The Cave of Bad Dreams is where Polocus's, the major spirit of the world, nightmares are housed and guarded by Jano, a terrifying floating head with one eye and plenty of sharp teeth. This level is one of the most memorable in the game, but it's definitely also one of the most hair-raising. Jano is constantly chasing players, with his teeth getting bigger and bigger on the screen to ramp up the terror even more. Throw on top all of the skulls, trapped souls, and monsters lining the walls, and the Cave of Bad Dreams is still one of the most chilling levels most kids have ever tackled. Number 2. Main Menu, Sonic CD. The Sonic series was already well on its way to becoming a very popular franchise with cool older siblings everywhere when Sonic CD arrived in 1993. Universally praised upon release, the game featured cutscenes for the first time, characters like Amy and Metal Sonic, and smartly utilized time travel to present different variants of levels depending on how players perform. And yet, it's a strange and undoubtedly unsettling hidden Easter egg in the main menu that Sonic CD has truly become infamous for. By pressing down, 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 left, right, A in the main menu, players will be taken to a sound test screen. By inputting the numbers 46, 12, and 25, they'll then be greeted by a jarring screen of 3 rows of Sonic images, only with the hedgehog's face replaced by a creepy-looking human one. The Japanese characters on the screen translate roughly to "Fun is infinite with Sega Enterprises," Majin, with Majin being a term used to describe a devil or demon. Throw in some echoing laughter from Dr. Robotnik that can be heard over it, and it caps off one of the most chilling images from the 90s. Number 1. GYGS, Earthbound. For the most part, Earthbound is a cheery video game filled with colourful visuals, an exotic soundtrack, and the sort of humour that made it incredibly popular with younger audiences, especially in its native Japan, which only serves to make its final boss fight that much more surprising and downright chilling. Also referred to as the Universal Cosmic Destroyer and embodiment of evil, GYGS' sole goal is to chuck everyone and everything into a never-ending void of darkness. GYGS' appearance in Earthbound is one of those ones that's made even more terrifying for being a product of its time. The glitchy sound effects, hazy red-black colors, and distorted sequence of tormented skulls across the screen make for a truly nightmarish experience. In the game, GYGS' insanity means that players have to deal with its random attacks and unsettling murmurings, all while trying to overcome their own nerves to beat the thing. It's an encounter that wouldn't be out of place in a Resident Evil entry, so how it ended up in a game based around 4 children setting off on a lighthearted adventure, we'll never know. That's the end of our list, but let me know down in that comment box if you have any other ideas for moments in children's games you played when you were young that absolutely terrorized you. We'd love to hear about them. As always, I've been Jess from WhatCulture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you like, you can come follow me on my Twitter account where I'm @JessMcDonald, but make sure you stay tuned to us here for plenty more great gaming lists.